All right. So today we're going to talk about how to pose and then get into a little bit of like your posing flow and how you can pose people so it's different every time, but you're still using some of the same poses. So, as always, we're going to start with a little quote. And this quote is, how do we start taking pictures of people and stop taking pictures of poses? And I thought that made me really think. It made me think about how you're really capturing a person and not just a pose. And photographers all the time are like, oh, we're trying new poses. We want to make it, modern poses or I don't know, like prompts, and we want it to be different than everyone else, right? But it's like if you're putting people in a pose they're not comfortable in, you're not really capturing them, you're capturing a pose. So I constantly have to remind myself of that too, of like, am I capturing the people or am I capturing what I want to see? So, good little thinker. So, this is what we're going to talk about today. The first point, we're going to talk about posed photos versus candids and how we can position both to be part of a gallery. Then the second thing is the basics of posing. Some of this goes into like the composition of a photo. I kind of realized they were kind of like bleeding together. So it does talk a little bit more of like composing the photo and then how to pose for your composition. And composition is like how you take the picture basically, or how you see it in your camera. And the third thing we'll talk about is prompts that help you pose. And then the fourth, I just thought it was funny, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. I will get into how I think about posing and how you can constantly be changing your poses. Okay, it'll make more sense in a little bit. Okay, so first up, posing versus candids. I just had a couple points to note. The first one, most portraits are actually posed even if they look candid. So photographers have gotten really good about prompting, like I talked about in the last slide, prompting people to make it look candid. If you think about it, if a family is getting dressed up for pictures, more than likely all of their pictures are posed. Okay. It's not like, unless, I just turn around and see grandpa holding a little kid or something, that one might be a true candid. But even if I'm having like, okay, now let's hold hands and walk towards me, that's technically still posed. So candids are something that's really just a spur of the moment and it wasn't prompted by you or anyone else. The second thing, a true candids happen when the subjects don't know you're there. So I think of this like at a wedding, and sometimes it's helpful to have a very long lens on so they don't see you in the corner taking their picture or something like that, because people instantly, when they see that there's a camera pointed at them, they will act differently. So if you want a true candid, you almost have to be invisible, which is tricky. And then the third thing is most people want to be posed. Some photographers will say like, yeah, I'm just a candid photographer. I get people as they act, except people feel very uncomfortable if there's a camera in their face and they aren't told what to do with their hands or they don't know where to stand. People want to be told directly how to pose. And so knowing how to pose and being confident in your posing is really important when you start doing portrait photography. Okay, so here's where we get into posing basics, but it's kind of also composition. There's 6 or 7, it depends on who you ask, rules of composure for a photographer, okay? And the 3 that I'm going to talk about, because these are the 3 that I really look for in my posing, is the rule of thirds, triangles, and leading lines. Let's talk about it. So the first one, rule of thirds. This is what the rule of thirds looks like. There's 2 lines up and down, 2 lines going across. Each of these intersections, so right here, right here, right here, and right here, is the rule of third. Okay, so in this photograph, you see that the eye is drawn to this rule of third. Okay, I am notorious for I always put all of mine right here. And the reason that I do that is because Americans, not every culture, but Americans read left to right. And so our eyes are naturally drawn to the right. Okay. So that's why I'm constantly seeing myself put my subjects right here on this rule of third. Okay. This is a Google image, not mine. Next one. Now, this is kind of breaking the rule of thirds. It's giving us symmetry. Okay. So it's not in one of these intersections, it's right in the dead middle. And I do this a ton. Sometimes you'll see, I don't think it's as aesthetically pleasing when like the subject is in this portion of the photograph or this portion, but you will sometimes see that. You can also pose people. So like for couples, sometimes I'll put one person here and one person here and have them holding hands in the middle. And then that kind of intersects all of our rule of thirds. Make sense? So that's the rule of thirds. Next up is triangles. These are horrible photos, but it was Google, you know. So you're always looking for triangles when you're posing people, okay? And it can be like in this example of this family, they're posed in a triangle, right? Their faces and their bodies make the triangle. Same with this one, right? They were posed so that it's a triangle. But you can also see triangles in a single person. Notice the triangle here with her leg posture, and then also with her arms here. It's making a triangle, okay? And that's just really aesthetically pleasing to the eye for some reason. I can't tell you why. Here we have a triangle here, okay? So that's where you're going to see triangles come into play. Then lastly is leading lines. Leading lines draw your eyes in towards something, okay? So a lot of the times like roads or fences in this case, or walls, if you have a wall that's a leading line. So this is a plain example. It's not a portrait of a person, but you'll see the leading lines, and we'll talk about this again later. I have a picture that kind of shows some leading lines that associates to this picture. For example, here we have, first of all, the rule of thirds. She's up in this right-hand corner, and then the leading lines, the road and the fence, are drawing us back here. Okay. So prompts over poses. Let's switch gears now. We're going to talk about prompting, how to get someone into a pose without being like, put your right hand here, put your left hand here, do this, do that, that kind of thing. This is when it gets a little bit more candid, not necessarily all candid because they're still posing, but it helps you get more of a candid feel to your photos over just a strict pose. So for example, practice your first dance. I do this a lot, sometimes at sunset photos, like go ahead and just dance with each other. Sometimes you'll get people talking to each other, looking at each other, gets them a little bit more comfortable. A second one for like a family, tickle the most ticklish person in your family. So they'll all start laughing, giggling, right? That kind of thing. And I think Alexa, you gave me this idea. I can't remember. Whisper your Taco Bell order in their ear. So if I'm trying to get his head turned towards her, he'll whisper his Taco Bell order, and usually she'll start laughing and kind of looking away. So those are some of, like, coming up with some of those ideas. There's hundreds and millions of things that you can tell someone to do that help them pose more naturally. But I'm also a firm believer in telling people exactly what you want, because I think people feel more comfortable, like, okay, put your right hand over here on their shoulder, put your left hand over here on in your pocket. Now turn your head towards them, that kind of thing. So there's some of both. I do some of both. Some more like fluid poses that are prompt, and then some more that are like structured. So prompts over poses. Now back to the fun one, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. So how to come up with poses. A lot of people just go on Pinterest, or they use the same poses that they've used forever. My technique is to think from the top down, okay? Start with your body position, okay? So what way do you want the shoulders to face, okay? Do you want them to turn sideways to the right, to the left? Do you want them to be directly forward? Do you want one person to be all the way turned around and one person forward? That kind of thing, back to back. Think about the position of their body first. Then head to toe, okay? Do you want your head facing you? Do you want their head facing away? Do you want them facing this way? Do you want their heads together? So you start with their heads and their eyes. Well, first you're going to do the body position, then where their faces are going. Then what to do with their hands. People are always like, what do I do with my hands? Okay, do you want them in the pockets? Do you want them on the hips? Do you want them around each other? Do you want them straight down? Do you want them up like this, make it a triangle there, right? So changing just one of those things changes your whole pose, right? If you have people have their arms up around each other's neck and his around her waist, you tell them to put their foreheads together, that's one pose. Then if you turn their faces, just their faces, and squish their cheeks together, basically the same posture, but now it's a whole new pose because they're looking at the camera, okay? So just changing hands, or just changing face, eyes, feet, literally head, shoulders, knees, and toes, you can make up a million poses. Okay. So when I'm struggling with what to do next, I'll put them in a typical pose, like the typical pregnancy pose, right? Where the guy stands behind the girl. And then I have the guy move his hand up to her face, or I have the guy look away, or the girl look away straight forward, or you can make a million poses just by changing head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Make sense? Okay. So if you ever get struggled, even with like big group family members, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, make them all different, make those triangles, that kind of thing. Okay. All right. So now we're going to look at some of my photographs. We're going to look for leading lines, triangles, all the different poses from head, shoulders, knees, and toes. This photograph was at sunset on a wedding day. You can see I've made a triangle with their bodies. Okay. And how I came up with this pose, I wanted their foreheads to be together, but we had done a ton of pictures of them standing with their heads together like this. So I was like, okay, let's move their body position. Let's have them sit. So we had them sit, and I had their feet, told them to put their feet in opposite directions. I think his other foot's like right here. She's sitting between his legs. I don't know. And then their hands, their faces, all of that can be changed. If I wanted to change this photograph, I could have told them to look at me, put their cheeks together, or I could have had her put this hand around his shoulder, or I could have had him put this hand on the ground, or this hand up in her hair. There's so many different variations that you could have done with this picture. In this picture, I did not use the rule of thirds. I did more symmetry here. Okay. So next picture. This one, triangle. Right here, their whole bodies, and somewhat of their arms here too. We got a triangle. Leading lines, there was a bridge behind them that I used for leading lines to kind of draw it into their face. Notice how I use that to bring it right to the subject. Rule of thirds, that top right-hand corner. And then posing, his face is towards her. There was another photo of her smiling at me, and then I changed it where she just looks down with a straight face. Hands, they were holding hands down here, you can't tell, but I was just holding hands, and then she had her bouquet in the other hand. His backhand was around her and then holding her hand down here. Okay. Look at their body posture. Both of their backs are facing this way. If I wanted to change the pose, I could have had her turn around, face him. I could have had him turn around, be back to back. There's like a million different things that we could have done. Okay. Next one, here's where my big leading lines one comes in the fence picture. You can see this is a fence, and the road was my leading lines, even somewhat of the power lines here, not to the extent of the fence, but there are those. We have triangles, we have foreheads together. I have another picture of them facing me and smiling. This one kind of goes against the rule of thirds again. That's more symmetrical in some sense, having them in the center of the photograph. Part of the reason to have them in the center is if it's a very important, like you want to bring it right, someone's eyes right to the center, because someone's always going to look at the center first. So like in this case, I really wanted it to be about them, right? It's their wedding portrait. So I put them right dead in the center because they're the most important thing in the photograph. So there's that one. Let's see. This one. So this one it's kind of off the grid a little bit. It doesn't follow a ton of rules, which you shouldn't always follow the rules. And that's what makes art, okay? So there's a few things like leading lines with the windows, with the building. This was actually a corner, so it was kind of drawing them into the center. I should have shot this. Usually you don't want to cut off feet, but in this scenario, I cut off their feet. So usually you don't want to cut off their feet, but it still turned out okay. Since he was quite a bit taller than her, it was a little bit tricky to create that triangle with them, okay? So this one isn't necessarily a triangle, but I do have a triangle here with her arms. And then this prompt was just walk towards me and give each other like little booty bumps kind of thing. And it made him smile. Okay, I think this is the last one, yeah. Rule of thirds here. We got them right here in the right upper hand corner because I constantly put people in the right hand upper corner. Leading lines with this brick wall. And then I really draw, even probably the bottom right-hand corner of the rule of thirds would be like the train, because we're really drawn to that train hands situation. We had his hand up on her face instead of around her back. She was holding her flowers instead of up around his neck or around his back. They're kissing instead of smiling at me, or just their foreheads together. All different kinds of things, right? See how we could just change these images slightly to make a different pose? That's what posing is all about. And that's how you come up with new poses. So, questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here.